guys, it's France, week 71 of the Journal on Monday series. I'm applying a first layer of Distress Stain Spun Sugar, and I didn't expect to encounter this problem, but the ink had quite some problems drying on this kind of watercolor paper. So even though I insisted with my heat gun, when I started on my second layer I had some trouble. So first, embossing ink applied with a makeup sponge on top of this Crafters Workshop stencil, and then I'm going in with some clear UT, but like I said, the ink had really some troubles drying on this paper, and I just had UT everywhere, almost at least everywhere. So I was a bit doubting what to do, to keep going or just to take all the UT off again, dry the paper a bit more. But no, I decided to just keep it this way and keep going, and I would see where it would get me. So once the UT was melted, I applied Distress ink, and these are 3 different shades of green. If you want all the details on colors and products I'm using, check out my blog francepapillon.com. Once I applied all the greens that I wanted, I also added a bit of vintage photo on the edges. And you can still see the breads from last week's page. And then I'm using some water to blend everything. Once dry, I'm adding some more splatters of water, and then even smaller splatters. Going in with white and black fluid acrylic that I watered down a bit to create some colorized splatters. And without leaving it time to dry, I'm taking the excess ink away. Then, using my iron and some tissue paper, I'm melting the UT again to pick it back up. Now, if my technique had worked the way I wanted it, I would have chicken wire all over my spread, but as I didn't have any patience for the ink to dry, well, this is what I ended up with, but that's okay. And I'm really insisting with my iron. I'm placing waxed paper between the previous spread to avoid having color contamination or stuff melting down on each other. So you can do the same at home with a regular iron, as long as you turn off the steam. These are my new Colorex toys that I posted on my Facebook, that I blended in empty dilutions bottle. So this is the tissue paper I used to pick up the wax. I crumpled the paper, and now I'm laying it flat again, spraying some water, and then my Colorex sprays. This is the tobacco and the sepia color. Spreading the ink around on the different pieces of paper. And of course, where there's UT, it won't pick up any of the ink. This is my waxed binding thread that I'm going to use as an embellishment, and to do so I'm colorizing it using my new favorite Colorex bottles and picking up the excess ink with a leftover of the tissue paper. I'm simply gluing it down to create some grids on my page. Now, to make sure it will stay in place, I'm adding some Decopatch glue with a very thin brush. When doing this, you have to be careful not to move the distress ink around that's underneath. And then I'm adding some more distress ink on top of the tissue paper. As it has been crumpled, the ink will pick up in the creases, so it will all be accentuated. Today's video is about 17 minutes long, and it took me a little less than an hour and 15 minutes to get it done. I had several ideas in my head of what I wanted to do. I knew about the thread, I knew about staying with the distress, but I had no idea what the finished page would look like. So that was just going with the flow. I know I want to add some stitching in the tissue paper, but to do so I have to reinforce it just a tiny bit to make sure it won't completely rip apart in the sewing machine. So I'm adding just a piece of cardstock on the back using double-sided tape. As I want my sewing to match the lines from the thread in my book, I'm using a pencil to make some marks on the tissue paper. Of course, the pencil won't take on the UT, so it's a more or less mark. And then using my sewing machine, I'm adding some lines to it. Now I wanted the second piece to be a bit smaller, so I just took a piece off. course, I had to glue it down to realize I wanted to add some stamping on top of it. So using a Tim Holtz stamp and some distress ink that I'm spraying a bit with water, I'm stamping on the tissue paper. So what you don't see, because it's off camera, is that I'm spraying just a tiny bit of water from far away on the inked stamp. And then taking out another stamp, I'm doing just the same thing. A bit of ink, a bit of water, and then stamping. Now as I'm stamping with distress ink, I'll have to, once dried, take the ink from the UT off because it won't dry on the UT. And then I'm also adding a little butterfly on the sides of my spread. Then using a baby wipe, I'm going over the butterfly because I didn't water that stamp and it was a bit too harsh compared to the rest of the stamping. And then I'm finishing with my thread, and I'm also including a scrap piece of watercolor paper that has been colorized with distress ink, vintage photo distress ink. And that will be my little spot to journal on. I am not gluing that last piece of thread in the middle on purpose, just to take it a tiny bit out of balance. That will keep the, in my opinion, organic look as I want to have it. And then again, adding the Decopatch glue on top of the thread to make sure it will stay in place. And adding my date stamp, though I knew I wasn't done yet. I'm adding a bit more of distress ink on the edges. This time it's black soot. And then I thought it might be a good idea to add some wording. And I even applied some Decopatch glue to make sure it would stay there. Thing is, once done, I didn't like it, the wording, so I took it back off, and that's the good thing about UT underneath. The glue didn't have the time to dry completely, so I'm adding a little tag. This is a 7-dot studio tag that already has a wording on it, and I want to finish the tag with reinforcement ring, so I'm making one. I'm not taking the rest of the wording away, I'm just leaving it underneath because I'm scared to rip the tissue paper apart. At this point I was still missing one element with some popping colors, so I'm stamping the hanging hearts by Stamp Boutique and colorizing just one tiny little heart with red Copic markers. And I'm adding a bit of distress ink on the edges to take off the white. And after gluing it in place, I'm also going around it with a black pen. Then to make it pop a bit more, I'm adding some glimmer glaze to it. Now after doodling around the tag, I thought I was done, but off camera I also added a bit of Colorex splatters on my tag to make it work with the rest of the page. I hope you liked today's video. Feel free to try this at home. It's safe, you can go for it. See you back next week. Ta-da!